Here we are at last. In the recent weeks and months, we have tested a total of 12 heat exchange espresso machines. We measured, we pulled hundreds of espressos, we frothed, we checked the temperature, we reviewed the power consumption, the materiality, the accessories, and today in this video, you'll find out which of these machines are our test winners and if they're the same ones. Enjoy.
Is a water tank. Predicate water tank.
The moment has finally arrived. We are now reaching the final video, which successfully wraps up the series of tests dedicated to heat exchange espresso machines. We tested 12 machines which are now behind us, and we'll share everything in detail about how it went. We truly explored a variety of different and diverse aspects. Beside me is Michel, who has been with us throughout the entire test series, and our APAs.
He's not around now.
We won't be drinking the APAs anymore either. We are completely done, in every sense of the word. We have really gathered a lot of data points, just to say that. For example, we measured the temperature of all these machines multiple times, and one temperature measurement consisted of 1,500 data points. Because every second was a data point, and we always checked what's in the machine after 25 minutes, which is hot, which isn't hot yet, and what happens then during the process of making 5 espressos. And what specifically and how and who performed and in which way we describe in detail in this video. You'll discover everything right away in the upcoming hours. And if that's too much time for you, here's just a brief teaser and some information. You can take a look at the detailed test report that's available, which allows you to examine more closely the temperature curves and see how they ended up. And next Tuesday there will be a shortened version of this video available, with a pared down variant included. Let's see if we can accomplish this task within a time frame of 10 minutes. We'll briefly cover all the important facts about each of the machines, and then discuss in detail which one is best suited for every kind of coffee drinker or enthusiast. Michel, before we dive into the details, can you briefly explain what exactly we tested here and how? What's a heat exchanger machine? Let's start with that.
What exactly is a heat exchange espresso machine? It's a type of coffee machine, commonly referred to as a portafilter machine, which contains one boiler and a built-in heat exchanger. This heat exchanger, or I simply have a second circuit, and with the machines here, it's always built with a heat exchanger. That indicates there's a welded cylinder located inside the boiler. It provides both hot water along with steam. Now with one machine, there's no hot water, but usually there's hot water in there, steam on top. And in this heat exchanger, the cold water is then pumped in at the bottom or top depending on its function, and is then heated by the surrounding boiler. You often read about it. Somewhere it mentions HX, which stands for the English term heat exchange, really emphasizing the process of heat exchange. Interestingly, all these machines here have the capability to both steam and extract espresso simultaneously. More or perhaps less perfect, or maybe not quite at all.
More or less, that is naturally also an initial characteristic for differentiation. Basically, that's the idea and the difference from a single circuit. Pressure and temperature needed for brewing actually originate from a single source, meaning both the steaming pressure and water temperature for brewing come from one common boiler, and you have to switch. I first make the espresso, then switch up, go from 93, 94 to 120 degrees to have the power I need for steaming. In a dual boiler setup, there are 2 circuits, one for brewing coffee and another for steaming milk efficiently. That would basically be the price range above. We'll take a look at both price ranges, both areas. Today, just the 2 circles. And now you can look at various criteria. We did that too. Among other things, Let's take a look at the espresso performance. What matters for espresso? They all create pressure.
They all use pressure. For those still rating by pressure, we didn't evaluate it.
We didn't see it.
We didn't even take a look at that because the pressure is there. The pump generates around 9 to 10 bar of pressure. And that with the relatively high consistency, whether vibration or rotary pump, really forget about this topic with thermoblocks. That's a different story. But with heat exchange espresso machines, you can really forget about it. We focus on consistency, both during this extraction, estimated to be about 25 seconds, and across different extractions. Specifically, we are evaluating consistency over the span of 5 separate extractions after sufficient heating time has been reached, where we ideally want to achieve a perfect range.
That's the
catering ability. We call it catering ability. Is a machine able to do catering? Did we also find some that can do that? And then we'll definitely look at these as well. We didn't just test the machines, we also stroked them. We gently petted each machine and checked yet again to determine which one feels.
That's why the test ended up taking long.
We did quite a significant amount of petting. Which one is honestly the nicest to pet? And we took a closer look at how the portafilters are constructed, what tools are available for them, with a special focus on the tamper. How is the water tank? How does it come out and go back in? How big is it? What kind of boiler is it? Is it insulated? Is it not insulated? How big is it?
In those parts where we have also delved deeper into these distinctions within the individual videos or within the comprehensive comparative report, we refrained from rambling on about every single detail, which you can find and read about extensively elsewhere. I don't think that's very interesting for you, but we checked which information is still missing. And we sought to figure that out. We also checked how the shrink usage really is. After 25 minutes, if you've pulled 5 shots, after 2 hours, after 4 hours, how much do they actually consume? We closely examined how long they need to heat up. After that, we took the
Foam power was being meticulously and carefully observed.
who quickly heated it up and how they did it, who added the right amount of power, and who delivered it all after the first or after the second, to the third, to the fourth cappuccino. We took a look at that, and indeed those are definitely the most important things.
And I would say let's dive in with, what are we starting with? I would say we dive right in with the first impression. How does this machine feel? How is it processed and put together? In that sense, let's go on to examine the edges and the outer finish, and we must clearly say there are, well,
Which come at a higher price and truly stand out in a remarkable way, and you can distinctly notice that with almost every single one of them, as certain machines positively catch my attention.
definitely the Rocket Mozzafiato Cronometro, especially with those massive sidewalls. It makes the whole thing feel very, very high-end. Absolutely no sharp edges, and it's just beautifully embedded. That's genuinely very beautiful. The Andreja is superbly rounded. Everything is nicely rounded off and completely clean, similar to the Xenia.
With Xenia, it's really about these wooden handles, but the whole exterior, you can really tell it's made with high quality, it's well thought out, and truly absolutely fantastic for the user's everyday activities. Exceptionally well crafted.
That's just everything. Everything is super nicely crafted. It's really nice, everywhere.
With more affordable machines, the majority tend to fall noticeably short, unfortunately. There are stronger or sharper edges there, especially at the top. Every time you touch them, nearly all of them can almost cut you. I'd say the Lelit Mara X is the bright spot here. Yes,
Absolutely indeed, for certain.
it has these sleek curves, and even though it's a relatively thin material, what you can feel from the outside, perceiving it by touch, is that it is well crafted and quite impressive. It has fewer sharp edges, and that makes it an absolute joy from the outside. Also positive is the quick Mill Rubino. The quick Mill Rubino is also there. I mean, when you're just at it again and stroking your machine, with the quick Mill Rubino up here, it's harmless. Down here at the corners, it feels sharp once more. But otherwise, even over there on the side that's more finely crafted, you could definitely say.
And in addition, a couple of items that really, really lag significantly far behind, most notably the BC10, with a vast number of things that just don't, not so well processed and not quite as clean with the cheap lid. And it's also the least expensive, but that's just the way it is. Everywhere.
However, I must mention once again that when you examine this closely and make comparisons, you'll notice the railing.
Yes, that's true.
Such as the railing that conveniently comes with the Rocket Appartamento, that plastic piece, which we have already managed to break. You have the option to purchase it, but, well, in bent steel, you can buy it as an additional feature, but the cost is there. Yet, there are folks who craft it themselves nicely using upholstery, making it even more beautiful. Yes, but... Yes. Although the thing is, you would end up paying 500 francs less or 500 euros less, and
Somewhere you have to recover that too. So let's delve into discussing the water tanks of our beautiful machines. Even this seemingly minor detail is not without its importance, which is why we made sure to conduct a very thorough and careful inspection of it. It's not really about the size. Most water tanks typically hold somewhere between 2.5 and 3.5 liters. However, it's more about how it's constructed and integrated. We will go carefully through each machine in detail and take out the water tank because we intend to turn on and thoroughly test each and every machine later. Rocket Appartamento. Take off the lid. You'll find 2 sophisticated rods inside. Simply give them a good pull and it operates flawlessly without any issues. With some effort, carefully place it back. No hoses inside, which is quite great, and then put the lid back on. The only downside is that you lose a slight bit of space up here for placing the cups, but on the other hand, it's elegantly solved with a beautifully designed lid. That is already rated as good, definitely. Lelit did something very similar, also with a small lid, but it's a bit narrower and has a little more space at the front. The proportions of the machine have been intentionally designed to be quite slim. They even designed handles that you can lift up like this, you can pull it, and then reinsert it and easily click it back into place. Yeah, just being good is enough. ACM Homey. I believe that the person who designed this machine never removed the water tank, because despite having strong hands and really having strength in my fingers, you have to figure out a way to get in at the edge somehow. I find it incredibly tedious and frustrating. I then started just pulling it out this way, but unfortunately, I don't have any space at the edge to get a proper grip on it. Still some form of handle in the center, and if the tank happens to be half full, that is never good, because the insufficient water tank makes it almost impossible. And once again, these razor-sharp lids, as we've already pointed out in the test, are not designed well. The BZ10, we've mentioned again during the test, consists of just simply bent sheet metal, lacking the high quality feel and without any handles, but you can still remove it flawlessly. And here additionally, you have the version that comes with the hoses, which offers an option for those who might need it. Detach hose 1, then remove hose 2, and you can access the water tank. Following that, put the tank back in, attach it securely, and make sure the lid is properly placed back on as before. Is a water tank predicate water tank, nothing more. The Elba. The Elba has such a plastic cover that the cup tray doesn't get scratched. Is not exactly the most aesthetically pleasing one, plus the edge is not very visually appealing. The lid comes with a hole, allowing you to take it out once, and that isn't particularly great either because you have to pull it out by the 2 pins. Definitely goes more smoothly than with the ACM Homey for sure. But still, so. It doesn't sit too tightly and comes out relatively easily, but honestly, a handle would have made a significant difference. Simply having a handle would have definitely helped. So, I've never removed so many water tanks in a row before. Brilliantly solved with the Magica by Bezzera. A huge cup holder crafted so solidly that it can be removed in one go. We tried it, even if there are cups on top, it works perfectly as long as you haven't stacked them high. Simply move it over. And as for the water tank, there is a simple hose system, and you can conveniently pull it out from the side anytime you need to. Have to be a little cautious as it's really sharp here. And then we come to this enormous 4-liter water tank, which is actually one of the biggest ones we tested. I'm not exactly sure how many espressos you could make with it, but it's definitely quite a lot, so that's really well thought out. Then, probably the most luxurious aspect is the water tank that you could ever imagine. They really put a tremendous amount of thought into it. First and foremost, you have the lid on top, which is not only very thick and a bit sharp, but also crafted with such high quality. And here it's also ingeniously solved with the hose system. But the reason for this is the cool thing. It allows you to assemble it yourself exactly the way you prefer. You can easily pull the water tank off to the side whenever you need it, which makes it incredibly user-friendly and flexible in terms of setting up your setup. That's really impressive because there's always this debate about the coffee machine's place. I believe it doesn't belong in the kitchen. However, if there's a small cabinet, you can slide the water tank either way, by the way. So I can simply put the hoses back in here. And then I can push it out from the other side too. It conveniently works on both sides. That's a really nice solution, without a doubt. It should be possible to replicate that with the others as well. That definitely helps. Beautifully solved with the Profitec, just like with the Bezzera Magica, with its spacious design and cleverly constructed tray that you can simply slide out from the edge, functions well even with cups placed on top. You can easily set it on another machine, giving you additional space, which is highly practical. The water tank can also be removed effortlessly, operating smoothly without any issues. I'd say it doesn't feel as sharp as the Bezzera. Nevertheless, it maintains its quality. A small rod or handle, or something creatively designed, could have been a perfect addition here to complement the setup. But that works perfectly. Wonderful. Rubino. Rubino, still the version we tested first. One of the oldest tests, I believe, that we had. They also have a lid now, though there's still the version here with the side panels, which can be easily removed. The shelf can indeed be quite tough to handle. It's tricky with cups on it, as it lacks the necessary stability. You'll certainly notice this, since I don't have those helpful handles like here. That's been handled a bit more straightforwardly. And right here you still have the older version with the hoses and simply a water tank within that setup. In the new version, that's addressed without using any hoses. There's actually already an even more advanced device available now. The rocket, always so typically rocket. The water tank is installed in the same way throughout the rocket. Cover once, then away. Pull out these two handles once. Lift up and back in. Let the air out once. Put the lid on and it's all done. Alright, let's proceed to the ECM. With the ECM again, you can see it's pretty slim. The Mechanika Slim is really, if you compare it just in terms of size, when you place the two covers side by side, it's truly incredible. The system is exactly the same as with the Profitec. You take the entire lid off. Also a great solution. Works perfectly with cups on top. We tested it as well. And there it's indeed quite brilliant, offering a lot of space without any holes whatsoever. I can effortlessly reach in, remove it, and just as simply place it back in again without any hassle. It even has chrome steel guide rails on both sides. It's impossible to insert the water tank incorrectly, but that's absolutely top-notch. It's incredibly cool and straightforward. It's just exactly what you genuinely need, with no unnecessary fuss or frills. The quick Mill Andreja, with the solution of having a little lid that you can open and close, I find incredibly well designed. It's somewhat annoying that if you happen not to pull the water tank forward initially, it does easily catch on the lid. So just pull it a little forward and then take it out. Works perfectly, and the water tank is neatly designed with such a redling. Everything is quite massive. And then you just put it back in, close the lid once again, and this part is also protected with foam padding so you really don't feel the vibrations. Conclusion of this heat exchange espresso machine round, a clear test winner, there's no doubt about it. Once installed, it's like Xenia. The ability to access the water tank from both sides, even when hoses are inside, is wonderfully handy, and also from the top, depending on what you've chosen. That's really well constructed, and then there are a few that follow where I just see great solutions behind them. On the one hand, dealing with the entire lid from Bezzera, which also encompasses those from both Profitec and ECM. Superbly executed, very straightforward. Then the lid from either the Rocket or the Quick Mill Andreja, also really well done. Simply remove the covers or open the lid. And then there are one or two that are somewhat tricky, where the process gets a bit more tedious. For example, from the BZ10, a more straightforward version, still furnished with tubes and missing a genuinely nice water tank. At the Elba, well, it's a bit tricky with the pinwheels. And way at the back, then the ACM Homey, where I just have to say, hey, I'm almost scratching my hands off if I even want to remove the water tank. Of course, you always have the option not to remove the water tank at all, but to simply fill it with filtered water using a carafe. Then it honestly doesn't matter all that much exactly how you can remove the tank.
Nothing works properly without a temper after grinding. You need to compress and condense with the temper. And with some machines there is a tamper included, while with others there is something that we wouldn't call a tamper. We've already found many terms for this during the test series. And you've also come up with many ideas about what you can do with it. For example, wrapping a laptop cable around it or something similar.
Hang really big headphones on it.
Attach large headphones, right? It's about those plastic things that are also included. We don't have them here anymore. I believe we destroyed every single one. That's why we don't count them as temper. Let's quickly review the tempers included. They vary in quality. Some fit perfectly into the portafilter, others less so. Tell me quickly, your highlights. What are your highlights, Michael?
Highlights, there's one highlight. Actually, there's one highlight that really stands out. The Tamper of Lelit.
Yeah, all right.
Firstly, he is really nice. He has something for me that's most important. He is a bit bigger than 58.5, not much, but it's not quite the 58.55 that's stated. It's a bit less when measured, but he fits perfectly into the portafilter and does this.
Tiny gap between 58 and 58.5, that's what he prevents. He seals it completely, which ensures no coffee grounds escape past the edge when you apply pressure. This results in a simple, beautiful, clean and flat surface, which is fantastic fun. Aside from that, the tampers included with the ECM and Profitec are quite good as well. However, I find them a little too thin for my liking. A thicker base is preferable because as you tamp, most portafilters tend to sink in and you lose the feel of whether you're keeping it level. It's just a tad tricky, tedious, and that seemingly manages to stay precisely where it should. However, they are skillfully crafted to fit quite flush, meaning they genuinely do not exhibit much of a large edge at all. That's undoubtedly good to hear. Additionally, it also somewhat depends on the amount of fill volume that you currently have in the portafilter. But you shouldn't, for example, with the edge, you can then feel if you're flush on top, if your fingers are on the edge here. That's not the case with these tampers because you do need some space between the coffee grounds and the showerhead for optimal brewing. So they sink in. It makes it a bit harder to feel if you're straight. That's the reason they have a really nice shape with good circumference and diameter, but unfortunately they're quite a bit too deeply sunken. But decent tampers that you can absolutely work with, worlds apart from a plastic thing. No temper is included with the ACM Homey, with the quick mill. No.
That is a Bezzera.
Sorry, the Bezzera BZ10 lacks a temper, just a plastic thing.
Not putting much faith in Elba either. There's truly nothing from Elba. The other Bezzera have nothing at all, nothing you can really take seriously. Let's switch to the other machines. On one hand, we have the Rockets, and not just the Mozart Jados, but also the Appartamento. And at the other end of the table is quite a decent base, but it is definitely rather limited with 58 millimeters, has quite a bit of play. If you really use it, you can move quite a lot and, well, I think for an apartment in the range of 16 to 1700 Swiss francs, it's still okay. Such an aluminum tamper is also not that nice for tamping, because that's quite an edge up here. It doesn't feel comfortable in your hand. Still, I believe that for a machine in this particular price range, well, that's understandable.
Can one expect more?
Is it possible to hope for more, since it's quite difficult?
With the quick mills, with the Andreja, there's a tamper included. Just like with the quick mill Rubino, it's the same tamper. In terms of size, it fits quite snugly, with a small edge, slightly more than the Lelit. And it has a slightly thicker base than the ECM Profitec tamper, so it's more flush along the edge, which really helps to make it clearer when you're checking if it's perfectly level and straight. The Xenia doesn't include temper, you needed to order it specifically. Since there are already so many temp workers here, we didn't order one. It's really the case that you pay for what you order, and so they're not included now.
We also had several criticisms about the portafilters, which we would like to mention again in the overall test. Quick mill are exactly the same on both, spouts actually pointing in the wrong direction for us. You can really only just barely manage to time on a table, since the available gap is truly minimal. That's the reason why it is generally better to use a silicone mat or place a cloth under the feet, even though it may not be as thrilling. At the ECM, the extensions, just as we would like them to be, meaning to the rear, so I have ample space for tamping. It's really great. It fits comfortably in the hand, has a considerable weight, and it just looks even more premium and refined in its overall design. And they incorporate a small emblem with ECM on it, which adds a nice touch. What was somewhat bothersome for me were the spouts. They're quite wide, similar to what you see on the Xenia. During extraction, there's a noticeable flicker. As for Rocket, I'd say it's quite a plain and uninspiring portafilter without much excitement. Again, extending in the wrong direction. What they do is, they add a rocket emblem at the front. You can hardly see it because the outlets are obstructing the view. Aside from that, there's really nothing particularly special to mention. Classic portafilter that feels good in the hand. Rubino, the same as with the Andreja. Wrong side. Basically, it fits well in the hand. Neatly crafted, like a classic portafilter. On the Profitec, the spouts are back on the right side and are interestingly shaped a bit sharper than on the ECM. During extraction, the flow is nice and smooth with no wobbling. Of course, they don't put the ECM logo on it, instead there's nothing on it, but it's actually a classic portafilter as one would wish for, fits nicely in the hand. The Xenia portafilter is beautiful in my opinion, with relatively wide spouts which causes that slight wobble. Comes about, but the wood feels naturally super nice. Also, it truly makes a wonderful impression. The outlets are positioned on the right side, allowing you to nicely adjust it just once. Wood handles can also typically be added to the machines, but here we really put together a lovely machine. Whether you like it or not is subjective, but I actually find it quite cool. Even though it's made from cheap plastic, this initial part of the portafilter looks distinctly different. The design is quite unique and stands out. The outlets are once again on the wrong side. There's a bit more available space, but really just a hint. Yet it is nicely crafted in the peak area as well. Feels good in the hand. We criticized before, especially with the sieve, that it's just really big. Be aware with the original 7 from Bezzera that you're definitely not just working with 18 grams, but really closer to 20 or more with the bigger sieves. Elba. Outlets on the right-hand side, ideal for pacing. It's a different portafilter, though it's an affordable device, not as classical as typical ones. Feels really good when held in the hand. It features a matte finish, which is quite nice indeed. That's definitely a lot of fun, without any doubt. I'd really hope to see this from some other devices as well, because you just don't get this specific setup here. That definitely feels good. BZ10. Outlets are in the middle, which makes tempting really super easy again. The handle's design is classic and traditional, similar to many others, offering nothing truly unique or special. Be aware of this when you're considering buying a new portafilter. The BC10 has a different brewing group. You don't need the classic VEMA version of the portafilter, but rather the genuine BC10 portafilter, even if you're considering purchasing a bottomless one, for instance. Once again, the same issue as with the Magician. Remember, these sieves are quite massive. He uses more than 20 grams instead of 18. The cheapest machine in our test succeeded in having the spouts in the right direction, which is simply great, and the sieve is perfect. This handle is the same as all the others, but it works and somehow feels a bit different, which I actually like. Considering it's the cheapest option, it's not really special, just a portafilter, really. But that's perfectly fine. That's actually quite good. With the Lelit machine, you need to get used to it and understand all its little quirks. These outlets, they go out towards the front, meaning that the flow comes directly towards me when I use them. That looks cool. Yeah, if you like it, I find it a bit too futuristic for an espresso machine, but it works. The actual issue with the slopes is there's just no feasible way, you just can't get proper access to it. They intentionally left a small gap between the outlets and the base plate, ensuring a clear and definite separation between these integral components. So when I switch everything off, then the projections don't come onto the table, only this support does. And because we have an angle here, it's almost level and can thus function flawlessly for tamping. That's truly a good solution for this very futuristic portafilter. It's definitely enjoyable and provides a unique experience. To reiterate as the final point, the Rocket Appartamento utilizes the same type of portafilter as the Mozzafiato. Portafilter, spouts the wrong way, portafilter with rocket underneath. That's nice, but as I said, it's somewhat of a shame. Otherwise, it feels good in hand, decent weight. Yes, it's a very good portafilter.
All right, let's focus on this criterion, the tamping and the portafilter, as well as how we can properly tamp. When it comes to the tamper, I think there's a clear winner, and that's the Lelit. It really fits wonderfully into the portafilters, especially with that lower ridge. With the portafilters or with the sieves themselves, there weren't really any tremendously significant differences.
I find the ECM nice. The only one that's a bit more special, except for the Xenia with the wooden handle, the spouts are a bit too wide for me.
But you can't really say something is completely useless or not usable at all. Our opinion is that it's just more effective if the portafilter is positioned the way Michel described, as it makes the tamping process noticeably easier. And it really contradicts our experience, especially in everyday gastronomy, where you constantly find some coffee grounds and so on, to tamp it in that manner. Firstly, it's harder to tamp straight, and secondly, the spouts can get contaminated by this coffee ground and whatever else might be on the bar surface, which then ends up in the espresso. This is why we emphasize it. Cleanliness and precision are key to keeping the overall quality and consistency in the process and final product.
Amazingly, with all catering machines, it's reversed.
Yes, that is really interesting and actually makes sense. So some people manufacturers are considering if they want to cut something from it or learn something from it. Naturally, it depends on how far out a drip tray actually extends. The shorter the drip tray happens to be, the higher the likelihood becomes when you turn the portafilter. With the Magica here, you would now carefully adjust the portafilter in this particular direction. You can verify it by attempting to securely clamp it here, or by briefly holding it in place for a short moment. You can already see that the spouts are extremely far forward, so if you take the cup away now and it still drips, it drips onto the edge here, runs forward, and you have a mess. That's why, on machines with a shorter drip tray, the spouts are angled backward. This helps prevent any accidental mess or overflow. By the way, it also has an additional negative impact. These specific portafilters can't be properly clamped into many types of grinders. Numerous grinders are purposefully designed to securely hold a reversed portafilter. That means you can't really get into the grinder properly. At least not into this automatic holder, and you have to hold it.
Works.
Some people might argue about whether or not the drip tray size really matters. The key point to focus on is how far they actually jut out. Depending on this extent, there could indeed be a bit more or less mess, so it tends to drip more. A very illustrative example of such a dripping story would be the Bezzera here, please 10. She really splattered all around the entire edge. But that's also because, oh no, she's got a moderately sized flow. Yes.
Medium 1. It's the sole portafilter exiting center.
Drips in relatively well, but this would be a scenario where directing the portafilter spout in that direction wouldn't be possible. It would end up hitting the edge with too much force, and as a result, you wouldn't have the option to position the buttons correctly in the center. That depends somewhat on how far the suspension is recessed or positioned back, and also on the extent to which the drip tray extends out from the machine itself. And noticeable, and also noticeably large, is a machine. Yes, the Elba has this huge drip tray steel. Yes, I think you could bathe in it, which I find cool as well. It can be completely removed. Yes, that's cool. So a magnetic connection piece, it's really huge, by far the largest we have here. Also relatively large are 3 other machines, which would be, for me, the ACM Homey, the Lelit Mara X also has a large drip tray.
And the quick Mill Andreja, which is very conveniently situated beside me, has a pull-out drawer that is designed to be impressively deep. So, there's quite a generous amount of room inside there. However, it's crucial to point out that on a couple of occasions, it ended up dripping forward. You can clearly see in the video, for instance, with the Appartamento, that the brewing group itself is positioned quite far towards the front. It's already dripping forward. Then it was with
Magica. Yes, Magica 2, positioned really far forward. That was noticeable.
That was definitely noticeable. And otherwise, it's the little things that make the difference. It's really essential to understand and realize that size isn't necessarily the main factor. Even a smaller drip tray can do the job well, because with the Elba, it makes a notable visual impression, standing out quite distinctly in any setting.
Then there's also a story about the volume. We sometimes smile about which are city center espresso machines, and which are better suited for rural areas, so that the single-family detached house only has to endure the noise all by itself.
I thought it must be quieter in the city. It can be louder because the noise level is already higher,
so to speak.
I'm from rural, so...
That mainly depends on the sound transmission to the walls, but definitely no.
Yes.
If the track was really loud or it is loud, it's like a tractor.
Yes, the Appartamento, that the real problem here is that we are only talking about 2 or 3 decibels, but you can hear it so clearly, you honestly can. And it was a really unfavorable comparison because we're back again to the sensory aspect as it is, and the hum is usually incredibly quiet. Then suddenly a loud tractor comes along. But in reality, it was only about 23 or so decibels louder than a Rubino 78.
79. We measured well with the phone now.
Using the phone, it's not entirely 100% accurate either, but it provides you with an approximation.
And with the Lelit, where were you at? At 72. The rotary pump was a bit quieter. Here we get back to the subtle difference. Vibrational pump, rotary pump. We actually have a rotary pump here on the table. It's not exactly a fair competition, but you can definitely observe that the Rocket Mozzafiato machine, when outfitted with the rotary pump, operates at a noticeably quieter level. Although the volume reminds me more of the Lelit truly has an interesting volume. It turned out that the sound of the dripping water ended up being even significantly louder than the noise produced by all three moments put together.
That was really quite cool. However, in the end, you really have to think carefully about it. A grinder is generally louder.
The grinder's quite loud.
Whether now if this is considered a selling point for a rotary pump, it's difficult, very difficult.
One potential selling point for a rotary pump could rather be its ability to be connected to a water circuit system. That's really the strong argument because you can't do that with all those vibratory pumps. We're moving on to the milk steaming test. That means we'll be steaming with each one again and checking the pressure and overall steaming performance. Also great to see them side by side now because we have them spaced out by... We tested them week after week after week. Michel is quite the machine, always consistently reliable, but it's a completely different feeling to steam them actually right next to each other. Michael, what should we be focusing on? What are the main aspects that really interest us? How is the procedure? How do we ensure that we always do the same things at the same time?
We'll do it in a way that we want to steam at the same time, because the benefit of a dual boiler is that we can extract and steam simultaneously. Even though it's not always that easy to pull the lever down at the right time, but still, that's the expectation one has for a dual circuit, that I can do this simultaneously. And the procedure is this. We do a normal espresso extraction, which takes around 25 to 30 seconds, with a beverage ratio of 1 to 2.5, in our typical brewing range where we usually brew and aim to steam at the same time. That means we begin the extraction process, observing the initial drops, which you would typically need to check, channeling or whatever, and then after 10 seconds we blow out the steam wand once, which you also have to do to get the condensation out. And then after approximately 16 or 17 seconds of the extraction time, we begin the steaming process, and then we stop the extraction while steaming and just observe how it behaves.
Right. We stop the extraction after 25 seconds, where we can or must stop it. After that, we examine the pressure to see how the complete process runs. Normally, there are usually two distinct phases. We begin the process by adding volume during the pull phase, and then we smoothly transition into what is known as the roll phase. At the same time, it's interesting to see how quickly the milk actually heats up. Does increased pressure potentially result in more heating, or isn't that necessarily the case in every situation? These are the aspects we pay close attention to, and we can simply move through them step by step, and then look at which ones perform the best while identifying the significant differences. The machine in the back is quite interesting, as it clicks continuously. You can tell that they're turning the heat on or off. Alright, let's get started. We'll be steaming milk with a total of 12 machines, and machine number 13 is Michel.
Wonderful roll phase. Extracted more than enough power simultaneously.
There's really nothing to complain about. It's a clean extraction. I rinsed it out after 10 seconds. Began streaming around 17 seconds into the whole extraction process, and there was definitely more than enough power available. What you notice is that you foam for quite a long time, yet still have power. It just takes a little longer for the milk to get hot. But that's in the normal range, typical for heat exchange espresso machines. It feels like a bit less power than at the dot. Appartamento, I think it also takes longer. Funnily enough, peeking in, we are still on a bar. The circulation is good. That depends on where you find the space. So I have the pot at a steep angle. Like before with the Appartamento, there it was a bit less. I'm pretty warm at this point, but I've already been in the rolling phase for quite a long duration. It definitely takes longer. Even if the pressure in the boiler is actually higher than with the dot. Appartamento setup, it does function perfectly well. The truly wonderful aspect of this experience is that you have such a generous amount of time, so much ample opportunity to proceed cautiously with no pressure at all. You can allow this rolling phase to take place without any hurry or stress, in complete peace. I've encountered this before, but take a closer look at it, Misha. I would confidently say, now even nicer than the Appartamento before, but that's primarily because I've discovered the optimal spot a little better. That's not meant as a definite statement on quality. It's really just one of those minor phenomena you've encountered. We have more pressure on the boiler. During the steaming process, we always had a little more than 1 bar. In that moment, as I observed closely, I felt like I had a bit more time, despite everything happening. For steaming, you have a wonderful rolling phase. You really have a lot of time for steaming. Again, blown out after 10 seconds, started steaming after about 17 seconds, and then the extraction stopped again at the drink ratio of 1 to 2.5, so stopped in about 25 seconds. Just a very normal process again. The pressure drops less, but I also have less of this power behind it, but it still works perfectly with the rolling phase. You notice, though, that the milk heats up less intensely or more slowly. Still, absolutely perfect milk froth. Certainly, as I had already previously noted during my testing, it provides great help to all beginners because you have additional time and can still carry out a clean and efficient rolling phase. Compared to how it was before, it's like worlds apart. Now, honestly, very powerful. I'm almost hot. So it's going at a much quicker pace now. Even though I'm not absolutely thrilled by it apart from its name, but interestingly enough, it does genuinely provide a significant boost of power. It truly makes a difference during the extraction process. Not a problem whatsoever. It's the same exact procedure as before with the Lelit and even the Appartamento. And yet, there's definitely more power being delivered by the ACM Homey. Nothing to complain about, works perfectly, it's fun too, but it does demand a bit more because you have a bit more power. But it gives you the possibility to not have to search for the perfect point as much during the roll phase because the machine simply has more power. Spin it in the jug even if you're not quite at the perfect roll point of the machine now. And at 10 seconds, so you can see this wonderfully right now, hopefully on the video. It just keeps on spinning and spinning and spinning continuously over and over. Great. One thing we need to clearly say here is that we increased the pressure for the test to achieve the correct brewing temperature. That means we also had more power than in the first test, because when we have a higher pressure, we have a higher brewing temperature, but also a bit more steam output at the same time. Now, in the original test, where it's perfectly set, it really comes down to the brewing temperature. Excellent, superb performance, great for steaming. Pretty god, superb. There's really nothing to complain about at all. It rolls along smoothly and flawlessly with zero issues whatsoever. It heats up rather quickly, so I find myself already trying to keep up with the temperature adjustments. This efficient and rapid heating truly enhances its functionality, making it a remarkable asset and significantly increasing its overall performance in a way that's both impressive and reliable. That's more of a subjective statement. I have the feeling it got hot faster, but with slightly less spin than expected. It might be because I didn't quite find the perfect rolling point initially. However, it heated up quite rapidly.
This implies having less time available for completing all steps.
There's less time available now, which has resulted in a few additional air bubbles compared to the previous one, for instance. It would be necessary to make some adjustments by selecting a slightly different starting point for the rolling process to ensure proper balance. No discussion needed. Both processes work perfectly together. There's truly nothing to complain about, with the extraction consistently steady throughout. Everything flows smoothly, no pressure drop noticeable during steaming, but it works. It's fun. It gets a bit hot quickly, with what seems to be somewhat less of a roll phase or less spin in the pot. But honestly, there's really no downside or any negative aspect to speak of. Take a close look, it's really impressive, but it does heat up quickly. Same as with the BZ10, we had to increase the brewing temperature by raising the pressure through the pressure switch to heat up the brewing temperature, really providing solid steam power. It's really fun. Brewing is flawless. There's absolutely nothing to complain about, nothing at all. Absolutely no chance whatsoever. There's just no possibility at all of the roll actually happening. Not even the tiniest chance exists. No opportunity whatsoever for the moderate ones like. They truly don't take a slow glance or look at it. But still, she somehow manages to roll it a little bit anyway. I'm struggling a lot to get this foam to settle properly. I've tilted the pitcher to what I firmly believe is the largest angle that's possible. And at this point, I'm only gradually reaching somewhere around 40 to 50 degrees. It's quite a challenge. It's just that It doesn't quite integrate correctly. I simply have no effective circulation happening during the entire rolling process, and I find myself unable to draw cleanly because of this very fluid, bubbly foam. It functions perfectly indeed for pouring, yes, but as you can clearly observe, it's really quite a watery sort of cappuccino. I rinsed it beforehand so it can heat itself back up properly. Is everything in order? Now you can really hear it just now. It's going back up. Let's wait a little longer. It is now off again, and now it's at the absolute highest level we can reach. So let's check one more time. Still very slightly. I'm slowly pulling in volume now, and I'm currently at about just a little under 0.5 bar. And you can also see that I have a slight rolling phase going on. I can let it circulate a bit more thoroughly when I'm really so extremely close to the absolute limit, but I still haven't been able to really effectively pull in more volume because every time I try to add a bit more volume, I end up letting it roll again. Now I'll just let it stay as it is naturally without any interference and just let it roll smoothly. I'm now at about 45, then 50, reaching 55, and now we're at 60. I still have... It's definitely showing improvement, but I still don't quite have that level of connection as I typically experience it when you truly achieve a delightful rolling phase with a good amount of spin. So we've now had the opportunity to try both options once again. The left click, where the machine actively reheats during the extraction process, attempting to consistently maintain that stable temperature to sustain the pressure, enabling us to steam, and the right click, where it simply carries it through. Right-clicking really provides no genuine chance and no possible way to steam effectively at all. There's no way to establish a proper connection between foam and milk, let alone achieve any sort of decent stretching or rolling phase. With the left click, it drops down to around 0.5, nearly 0.6 bar. But even in this area, you have to pull so cautiously that you really constantly, so as a tip, if you have the machine or are thinking about getting one, pull in the volume very slowly and then keep the milk rolling continuously, allowing it to flow consistently. It's honestly really quite challenging because you have significantly less performance as compared to the other comparable ones. It's honestly really quite challenging because you have much less performance in comparison to the other similar options available. And here, you find heating, but not enough power to make it rotate. What we also discovered with our precise measurements is that at the moment we have a left click, we are able to steam significantly better. That we elevate the temperature towards the end of the brewing time, which results in a distinct and noticeable bitter note or a bitter espresso, quite unlike what we typically produce using the right-click option. When you have a cappuccino, you might notice it significantly less or perhaps hardly at all. However, it's more like while I can steam using plant milk, unfortunately I still don't have that perfect espresso. I would really suggest that you wait. Extract by right-clicking, wait until everything is back up again, and then start frothing. It usually doesn't go that poorly. It will drop down once more, but doing it this way works out much better overall. You really just have so noticeably less performance compared to the other classic VMA brew groups. So there is. It's almost like Xenia. I'm not adding anything extra now and just letting it roll freely to hopefully get a somewhat decent foam layer, but it's pulling a bit. It really lacks power from the start and it doesn't seem to spin properly. Yeah, she was now, I think, constantly at, I didn't even check, maybe around 0.8 or so. I'm now really focused on the measuring foam. And it looks like quite a bit over here when you actually take a look at it. But in reality, there's not that much really coming out, so we're looking quite okay. However, this does indeed challenge someone who hasn't foamed much before. Contains quite a few air bubbles, kind of like I would compare it to tapping on the left, left button Kenya, so off to the left. Xenia, but Xenia is also truly beautiful. Yeah, we could really dive back into it again sometime. So I would make this comparison. Steaming with the Profitec feels like pressing the left side with the Xenia. It's not really powerful at all, yet it still heats and doesn't produce any foamed milk. As we have gradually become used to by now from the... That's completely fine, but at this point we're just much more accustomed to it. Finally having fun again. It's pretty intense. You see it and you already hear it visually. You hear it visually, you see it, and you hear it acoustically already, whether you have power. I've been in the rolling phase forever now. I only have those 2 or 3 superficial air bubbles. With the quick Mill Rubino, similar to some others, there's simply nothing to complain about. Directly with full power, and also again rinsed for 10 seconds. So it was once steam to remove the condensate, then after 17 seconds, start frothing. Perfect, very, very powerful. So very, very powerful. A lot of power, great gliding phase, quick into the roll phase, which is also very, very long. And through that, a milk foam without visually noticeable air bubbles. It's fun. Absolutely. Indeed, that is really nice. A house number. That's even more than before with the Rubino. With the Mozzafiato, the only one with a rotary pump, which doesn't really make a difference when steaming, you really notice it. On the one hand, we also had to deal with the temperature rising. We increased the pitch control to the maximum. We're there at 124 degrees, which can be set as the absolute limit. And steaming is really power. It's really fun. It's most definitely not an outlier, but it is still not considered one either. Not insanely bad either, that's just totally fine, okay? It rolls smoothly, it's simply not an incredible amount of power. With the ECM. It truly is very solid, although it takes somewhat longer to heat up. There's somewhat less pizzazz than what I've observed with the Lelit. Rock solid, not. Overwhelmingly exciting and certainly not lacking, but when you get into steaming, it's enjoyable. Although it's also not a total game changer either. Solid and not overly thrilling. Enjoyable when you're steaming, yet not quite a showstopper. You can really notice it with the Andrea. There's noticeably less power, which became apparent as we found out during the first test. Regarding the temperature, it's in the range where we wouldn't go any hotter, so this is the point where I would adjust my approach. You can observe less steam performance compared to the rocket chronometer, but it's certainly around the average you'd expect. It's not quite at a level like the Profitec and the Xenia, which stand out more. But it's not too far removed from it either. I would certainly wish for a bit more performance overall.
12 different machines, Michel. Did you release any steam? Yes.
I really did manage to let off a significant amount of steam this time.
We possess a higher middle section, a central middle field, and an additional lower part of the midfield area.
A moderate midfield, can you say that?
So we have 1 promoted, 1 mid-level, 1 staying in, and 3 relegated. In the future, they will merely be represented as a circle. Those who have managed to secure promotion, or those who have successfully completed the Champions League qualification process, which now, when considering the rocket Mozzafiato, performs extraordinarily well, and you truly need to say we have reached the utmost limit of the potential of PID, and that is simply because of the brewing temperature.
This gives us truly exceptional performance, making it an absolute delight to write with, and it undoubtedly stands as my clear top choice. So, you need one again.
Xenia is protesting.
That wasn't planned. She's protesting twice.
Although you mentioned increasing the temperature, it is indeed quite high, but at the moment it's definitely not surpassing the level that we had originally expected it to reach. We'll discuss the temperature later on. We've raised it to reach the specific range we are aiming for. With that, we have hit the intended goal.
So, no, we have focused on brew temperature, adjusted the temperature higher so that the machine's temperatures are all set to brew the perfect espresso, so that we're in the range between 92
93.5, 94, at least, during the second extraction, if possible, somehow possible. Exactly, that's a topic again here that I don't really remember anymore, whether it's the second or third. So, someone mentioned they were in the upper midfield, because there are also different nuances. Yes.
I think because it's just a beginner's machine, where we're moving everywhere, it's also somewhat in the high price segment. But with an entry-level machine, I actually want a lot of power, but also plenty of time for steaming. And there it goes, the Lelit performs again. Great, really does it well.
It was really exciting with you. I was just busy filming and observing, but you mentioned I have plenty of time because it won't heat up so quickly. And yet you had a bit of pressure.
That's sort of surreal, but it ended up working out perfectly. Honestly, it seems like it takes a real eternity for it to heat up. It genuinely feels like it's really one of the longest, but it still manages to have plenty of power, allowing for a perfectly smooth and seamless rolling phase. Very pleasant machine for steaming, therefore I would say definitely in the upper midfield, like the BZ10. Even though I'm usually not that happy with the machine, but when it comes to steaming, top performance.
But now again, a long gliding phase and extended pulling phase. You've got time. Why is that a positive? What does that mean specifically for beginners right now?
It's like when you steam with a commercial machine, you have an incredible amount of power and very little time to steam, because this immense energy comes through the large boiler. And during this pulling phase, air bubbles form and we need to be able to eliminate them. You can manage with a clean roll phase, although with household machines, often even with commercial machines, there's a bit of mixing involved. So you simultaneously pull and roll them over, working to pop them again effortlessly. And this worked really well with the Lelit because we have swirl and yet not such a quick heating. And that's how you were able to break those air bubbles and achieve this perfect microfoam. That was indeed also the situation with the BZ10. And with the Magica, we found that we also had to increase the brewing temperature. Decent power, like at the upper mid-range.
The temperature rose quickly, so it definitely had a lot of oomph, but it got hot relatively fast as well. By the way, that's also the reason why we always recommend using cold milk, as cold milk can be heated for a longer period of time until it reaches that critical temperature threshold. That means more time for rolling and thus more thorough crushing of bubbles, and overall, that's fundamentally positive. I would probably say That was indeed our top quartet. Trio, well, Rocket Mozzafiato, and then the Lelit Mara X, with BZ10 also having been mentioned just now.
It continues to work like magic simply because outstanding performance. Bam.
Great performance. Then the others perform more in the middle range. Maybe we don't even need them. We will not delve into the midfield in much detail.
The foaming process is solid, and there's really nothing that's noteworthy. However, there truly seem to be three. There's one that just barely falls short of the mark, while two others are incredibly close indeed.
They barely missed their mark, yet still failed. I was really surprised by that. Surprisingly, Quick Mill Rubino couldn't quite meet the expected performance level.
It's a bit lacking in performance. We noticed that in the initial test too. Brewing temperature remains super consistent, but then it just seems to lack a little bit of punch. Close, but no cigar. It's about steaming, but it's definitely not comparable to the top performances today.
After that, we have the Profitec Pro 500.
Somehow inexplicable.
That's quite crazy. Has the massive boiler.
Has a 2-liter boiler, stainless steel. That's also something we found out. A larger boiler doesn't necessarily guarantee better performance. The ACM model, which is positioned in the mid-range category, has a 1.5-liter boiler and still functions well.
So, upper is midfield, in the middle midfield right at the top. So it really has, especially when you then look at the price-performance ratio afterward. Pretty cool performance, actually. Yes, indeed. And although the boiler is really straightforward now, and the Profitec machine has genuinely been quite the rock-solid performer at this particular point, and unfortunately, once again, it's been confirmed with the Xenia model. We have two different modes in operation there. We took another look at it. The switch moves both to the right and to the left. If you push it over to the left side, it will heat up again. When you press to the right, it essentially activates the brewing priority mode. The temperature then, which we'll go over shortly, is really well suited for brewing and stays quite consistently constant. When you shift the control to the left, it essentially reheats, effectively counteracting any drop in pressure and ensuring it doesn't falter. For cappuccino, for frothing milk, particularly if you wish to steam simultaneously.
Unsuitable.
Really difficult.
Unsuitable. And with somewhere below 0.5 bar, no chance can now already put us at the end of the table in the area of steaming milk. If you steam left, so if you press left, it is definitely better. It is better. It is just about on the level of the Profitec, but it does not really give me fun. It looks somewhat okay also visually, the cappuccino, but it lacks that connected milk steaming with this creamy texture that why. Witnessed with many other machines, and it's genuinely outstanding. So the best recommendation I can genuinely provide is to patiently wait for the entire process of extraction to complete and then and only then begin the steaming. Then it works, it's not the punch, but it goes for steaming much, much better than doing it simultaneously.
We're kind of finding ourselves in the tricky area there. Naturally, you can take a closer look at the machines that didn't perform particularly well, or those that remained in the middle range, or even those positioned at the bottom of the table. Still do some steaming with a few tips and tricks. By actually waiting, just as you mentioned.
But let's be honest, it's just a dual boiler. That means we actually want to take advantage of being able to steam and extract at the same time, which you can't do with a single boiler.
Unlike with single boilers, exactly. Single means
switch it on, heat it up, so brewing heats up, then steaming cools down again, which is intended to be made much easier here. And when we have this requirement to perform these tasks at the same time, which truly is the metric by which these machines are evaluated, then it really should be able to manage that without any significant problems. And that's why it's crucial for us. It must be fulfilled. It needs to steam and extract at the same time in a standard range. So everything in the middle and forefront is fun. With everything else, you have to think about it. Can you ramp it up? If so, what effect does that have on the espresso exactly? Does it get brewed too hot, or do we potentially lose the flavor? And let's be honest, in a cappuccino, you don't taste the perfect espresso quite perfectly anymore. But it's still a shame to make the product seem worse than it is.
So we come to our ranking, and indeed. At this point, it somewhat depends on how important features such as milk frothing are to you personally. As of now, that's the conclusion that we've reached. Let's proceed onward to discuss the crucial topic of brewing temperature.
It's about espresso and especially about brewing temperature. And we have to admit, after all the Appa's espresso, we've now treated ourselves to a Leica. Something just a little fruity once again.
Plus, it's coffee from our farm.
And new harvest. It is relatively new harvest was on the ship way too long, but that's not the point. It's about temperature exactly, and it's also about consistency. It's about consistency. It's about consistency over 5 extractions. It's about consistency, which machine has, but also during the extraction, especially we focused on the second shot, which machine has the best consistency on the second shot, because we assume that you then, yes, they like to heat up, they're a bit too hot or a bit too cold. They all have their little quirks.
Furthermore, since you all clean your machines meticulously according to Michel's instructions, there might still be some cleaning powder or residues left. Therefore, you might not drink the first espresso anyway, so you really have to make sure to rinse them well. That's why we decided to work with the second shot, examined the machines thoroughly, tasted various coffees, but most importantly we conducted measurements, really measured extensively and carefully. Namely, over 5 references, how we maintained the distances between them, we'll explain shortly. And within a particular reference point. We closely followed the alteration in temperature starting from second 15, moving towards second 25, and eventually arriving once more at that very same second, which is of course second 25. We have gone over that, and at this point we currently have
Checked it thoroughly, but just say briefly how we use the portafilter. What kind of tool is that exactly? Well, it's a portafilter with a temperature probe inserted inside the portafilter, and through this valve that's built into it, we release a certain amount of pressure. So water flows through as it does when making espresso. It simulates, you can't just simply take a blank filter and stick a probe in it since something has to come out. Otherwise, the water would back up completely. And we measured that using a device that we were able to connect to our PC, and through this connection, we managed to extract a CSV file, which provided us with insights showing us again what exactly occurred during the process. Everything is quite thoroughly detailed in the accompanying blog post too.
So a measurement like this, just to put it briefly, is actually 1,500 data points. Because we measured how long it takes for the machine to heat up. So no, in other words, we made the first reference after 25 minutes. And then those over 1,500 data points were completed, and then the process of examination began. By the way, you can read about the entire thing in detail in our blog post, where we've embedded every single measurement as a small visualization, and then you'll be able to see, too, how the whole thing changes from perspective to perspective. So, we took the first perspective. What did we do next? What was the procedure? And it wasn't the same for everyone, was it?
So basically, the idea of the procedure is the same everywhere. Because the idea is actually, you come home, the machine is hot, we assume a machine takes 25 minutes. We must say today, a machine usually takes 25 minutes.
We'll restate that very soon.
But basically. And then you go there, and with most machines, it's a bit too hot. That means you rinse for a little bit longer time, letting the water run for a bit. We mentioned that we'll rinse for 5 seconds and then initiate the full extraction process, which will last about 25 seconds. The significant difference here is concerning the machines, where through the user manual, advice from the manufacturer or whatever source, we were informed that we need to rinse, but not directly just before the dispensing, like the VMA iron groups, which usually run too hot. So instead we rinse before grinding, and we've adjusted that too. We fully delved into that because it makes sense to address tips when they are given.
So we were actually starting from the basic process. What exactly do you do once you've served the espresso at home or after you've brewed the espresso? The espresso is brewed, you distribute it to your guests, we waited for 15 seconds, then we removed the portafilter. That's when the whole process truly begins. You grind it, you assemble everything, and then clamp it again. So, 45 seconds later, we then have exactly 1 minute later following the end of the last extraction, started with the new extraction, but flushed for 2 seconds shortly before. That's correct. We did a 2-second flush, primarily to dissolve the cleaning powder, and also to lower the temperature. as it's a known issue with some types of brew groups that they tend to overheat during the process.
And in the interim noise extraction, mainly to detach the particles.
To detach the tiny particles, once more referenced for a full duration of 25 seconds, then
Pause once again for 15 seconds.
overcome. And that 5 times in a row, okay? And we visualize that for you. You can just look it up. Regarding the 5 extractions, Michelle, which machines are the outliers? Or put differently, which machine would you take to a catering event? Because even after the 4th and 5th extraction, it still maintains the targeted 91, 92, 93 degrees.
I would consider taking a machine along for catering, but with a small cautionary note. I'm just explaining that. The best in terms of consistency, with a small gap to number 2, was the Rocket Mozzafiato, with a but. It is generally a bit too cool, although we have the PID control for the pit's brewing temperature, and that is a temperature control, which means I send a signal to the sensor installed in the boiler and instruct it to increase the temperature. Now, with this particular device, it's crucial to mention that we consistently and exclusively test this specific machine that we have. That can't be replicated 100% on the thousands of machines that are produced. It's just, this is the impression we get from this machine and that machine and that machine. With this machine, we're at 124 degrees. That's the maximum on the pit that can be set. If you press it any higher, it then falls right back down to the very lowest level possible. And then we were simply at approximately 90 to 91 degrees. So it was rather on the cool side, but in these 5 extractions, it stayed super consistent throughout. And you couldn't do something like with some others using a pressure switch because you don't have a pressure switch. You have a sensor.
So, in that case, you would actually go to a catering event with Xenia because she ended up in 2nd place. It has truly remained quite consistent throughout. So if you consider from the initial reference to the final one, we have less than only a 1 degree difference across all 5 references. That truly is phenomenal indeed. It's crucial, Xenia, that you make a move toward the right-hand side. To the right?
Yes, that is genuinely key.
Because to the left, that's this reheat function, which also supports the steaming. We've measured a temperature increase of over 5 degrees. So it progresses each time. But that's not what it's intended for. And now we've also measured it with this protocol. We haven't let out any steam and so forth. Furthermore, the manufacturer specifically emphasizes that when it comes to making espresso, it's genuinely the alternative setting, the right-hand twist option, which is actually intended for this use.
Exactly. Just be aware that if you choose to froth and actually use the left button, then your espresso is certainly going to taste more bitter. That's why the tip again is, don't steam and extract at the same time if you want both to be perfect.
Now we know which machines we might potentially consider bringing along to a catering event. Out of these 12 machines, which ones would you absolutely choose not to take along to a catering event, Michelle?
Absolutely not. Let's put this into perspective a bit. So at this point, we have established a foundation in the top positions, which is incredibly precise. We're talking about less than 1 degree difference across these 5 extractions. That's truly incredible. We never would have imagined that when we started with this test. These home machines simply draw a straight line once through, absolutely top notch. And when you start to imagine that actually the last ones are somewhere around 5 to 6 degrees, sometimes just barely under 7 degrees, it's quite impressive. That's quite a significant amount. You honestly have to admit that. And the Lelit really drops off noticeably in comparison. You truly must acknowledge. The first extraction is indeed quite good. Meanwhile, the second one remains quite acceptable and holds up decently well. So we begin somewhere at, depending on how precisely the temperature control has been set, we initiate the process around 92 degrees. From there, we gradually make our way down to approximately 90 degrees and then it descends below 90. That's when it starts to hurt, especially in terms of the taste experience.
So it gets more and more acidic, it's less balanced, there's no texture anymore. And yes, the 4th and 5th espresso in a row over 5 minutes. It's like that, you can still manage to do it, but
then you would probably be better off making a cappuccino with. Yeah, really. Fundamentally good. And now you have to put it back into perspective again. You know, we brew 10 espressos. We actually make 10 espressos in these 5 minutes, give or take a bit more with the extraction times and so on. But these machines really deliver. So with the woman, the LED, and at the very front was still the Rubino, which also after the first Second and third extraction was still within range. The third was kind of borderline, and the fourth, that's when it goes down. That's how a temperature drop of nearly 5 degrees occurred, impacting the process as it unfolded. Not quite as intense as with the Lelit, particularly not with the final extraction. However, it still tends to go down.
Same phenomenon with the Profitec, as we already saw in the individual test. It just drops off massively.
And also, it somehow makes such jumps.
Exactly. We'll move on to explore the second topic right away. There's also a temperature loss of 5 degrees over the 5 references, and honestly, you have to admit, that's quite special considering it's a larger boiler.
Absolutely.
A much bigger machine, and it really stands out a lot. That was one particular aspect we examined closely. Speaking of which, we're talking about coffee production for catering here. We haven't discussed the milk frothing capability at this point. That was a separate chapter, which we've covered. But there is another point about temperature that we examined. That's specifically related to the temperature consistency during the extraction process, and we must acknowledge that a significant number of them performed exceptionally well in this regard. So we conducted a more thorough observation of the temperature levels just 5 seconds after the extraction process had commenced, and then how it was maintaining consistency after 13 seconds, or rather 15, and how was it after 22. And we considered and examined these 3 key data points. A few showed a slight rise in the middle before dropping, but overall, when comparing these points after 5 seconds and then 22 seconds in, we noticed that there were quite a number of machines that only changed within just a single degree. We were able to clearly see and observe this in our detailed individual tests. Regarding the diagram we just pulled up and are now examining, you can really nicely see in the test report how the curves fluctuate from one reference point to another. And yet, there were nonetheless a few noteworthy highlights that were really very precise.
There were 1 or 2 that truly stood out, and those moments were incredibly precise. However, it's important to note that there are really quite a few people who have to share this protest. And that was really incredibly amazing. That was also always, we have the reference point there, the second extraction, as we already mentioned.
Both extracts crucial, yes.
And that's precisely our point where we insist she has to deliver results. And she consistently delivered in almost all cases.
At the very top, much like the leader of a table, it's truly astonishing to witness indeed. I really didn't expect that at all. The rocket Appartamento, quite impressively, held its temperature to an accurate 100th of a degree for more than 6 seconds.
Sure thing. Yes, it was just a line. In essence, merely a solitary stroke on its own.
Quite amazing. So, variation in
0.2. Absolutely nothing significant. This is indeed at a world championship level for this second extraction. When you put that into context with the first test and think about how much it degrades over these 5 extractions, she also experienced a loss of 4 degrees. However, in the scenario where she really needs to delivers
it incredibly well, and it's absolutely perfect. However, you have to point out again, whether it's in an apartment or next to the machine, it's more like a single house setup, or just pulling a couple of shots. Once the shared apartment party starts, it becomes more challenging, or you need to allow it some time to recalibrate. Even at this level, you have the Xenia, the Rubino, and the Mozzafiato Rubina, including the Mozzafiato and the Magica, all of which stand out. I mean, with fluctuations as minor as half a degree, if you want to know the specifics, you'd need to check the test results. Clearly, there's nothing to criticize anywhere. It's amazing on the second pull. We're going to do that with some of the machines. We now have a few machines that we find really special, and we'll make individual videos that aren't necessarily test videos, but perhaps more like some detailed tip videos, particularly a machine like, in my opinion, the Lelit. You definitely need to spend some time to fully get familiar with it. And I think it's worth it if we do that again in a video where we show how we would use them in everyday life. Then there are also relegated teams, but not like... I'm not allowed to mention football examples, otherwise someone will give me a hard time. There are also quite a few in the back row of the table, but honestly, it's not really that serious.
It's really not that extreme. It's roughly around 1.5 degrees. Throughout the extraction process, we clearly should have been informed and made aware when we initially began. While testing the machines, I honestly would have said that was completely okay.
And then, with the restriction, in these main 20 seconds, those 1.5 degrees count. Then there are some machines that suddenly drop quite significantly after 20 seconds, You can easily see it in the curves and graphs, but it's not as significant anymore. In the last 5 seconds, we don't aim to extract too much goodness from the coffee. The temperature can then simply decrease naturally.
Going down to the basement isn't that serious nevertheless. Who falls behind is the Profitec Pro 500. That's just because the temperature goes downward, and truly, we're discussing only about half a degree more than who are distinctly ahead, and somewhere a bit more than a single degree higher compared to any of the other machines. And so many of them are on the podium or quite very, very much near to it, and there's just undeniably a relatively gigantic and noticeable drop-off.
In addition, the Latid is yet again found toward the rearward places.
The Lelit is positioned at third from the very last, whereas the BZ10 from Bezzera holds the second to last spot. But then again, it really depends on the degree. For the Lelit, it also depends on what specific temperature position we had during the test. We also took a closer look at where the relationships lie. You can really notice that each one has their own unique strengths and weaknesses, and some just end up completely buckling or falling apart after the second, third, maybe even a fourth extraction. And what you also noticed, as you'll see in the test report much, much clearer, is that machines really make leaps. And if you take this initial value, one from the first to the fifth extraction, and if of course the first was particularly high, the second considerably low, and the third very high again, then this range kind of aligns, but you truly need to observe it a bit to understand how it behaves correctly. Just consider that at your own home, it's quite rare to host 10 guests, all wanting 10 espressos in just under or around 5 minutes. You must actually put that into perspective.
You absolutely have to put it in perspective. Otherwise, we've generally managed to make really quite good espresso with the majority of them here. Some provided it more, while others were a bit more consistent. You really had to work your way into many of these machines. Now, there is indeed a limiting story, and we simply need to restore it because not all the machines were operational right out of the box, as they ended up being now. We can confidently say that we have managed to get 10 out of the 12 machines truly.
9.5 indeed.
9.5, we ended up making a really good espresso in the end. But it certainly wasn't with all of them just like that out of the box, push, and done. Rather, we had to carefully adjust the temperature. Espresso needed some adjustments.
So there's the possibility with a PID control system that you can handle it yourself. It's simple, just increase the temperature setting. As we mentioned before, the Mozzafiato maintains the most consistent temperature over these 5 extractions, but still a bit too low. This specifically applies to our machine now, but overall it's really super consistent. Nevertheless, we found ourselves needing to adjust the temperature slightly from its original setting out of the box. It's important to always really have these measurements, assuming you start the machine, and then it has to deliver. If it's been running for the entire day, then it behaves in a different manner, and you really need to take that into account and put it into the right perspective. We are aware of that, but we simply wanted to say, I want to turn the machine on and finally have my coffee after 25 minutes. And we have to clearly state that with 3 devices with Presso Start, which means we have devices that operate with a PID control features. There's a sensor that regulates the temperature. And in certain machines, there's a pressure switch, as installed in most heat exchange espresso machines, which regulates via pressure. When pressure drops, the heat turns on. When it's high enough, it shuts off, drops, and turns on. And so the temperature is regulated through the use of pressure control. With this pressure switch, I have the option, if I choose to, you can access it at the top section of the machine. It's not something that I would definitely recommend having it done by a professional, because you need to do it while the system is running. Next, you are able to adjust and increase the pressure on the pressure switch simply by turning a specific screw. And we needed to carry out that particular procedure with the BZ10, the Bezzera Magica, and also the Homey. We actually had to increase their settings because they were just too cold straight out of the box. The same Mozzafiato out of the box, temperature setting, I would make a connection there because there I can. For that, I'll buy a machine with PID.
Here, the phenomenon is actually our machine, our model, and up to now, we haven't exceeded the temperature.
We did not go beyond 91 degrees. When you measure it, after the 25 minutes, assuming everything is hot, but then she didn't go beyond, as we see in the logs, this almost, so what is it, 8 to 9 minutes with the extractions, where we do 5 extractions, it didn't go higher than that. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been the title soul, so it didn't get any hotter than that. Perhaps, if it's left on for a couple of hours, it might eventually heat up. However, to put things a little into perspective, this is generally too cold for the device we have standing here.
Yes, so we have also explored machines that were taller than this one. However, with this particular model, the one we conducted tests on, and I really need to emphasize this, the conditions were too cold.
One could really say, out of the box. It is extremely difficult for you at home as well. You take the machine out and you should actually assume that the machine is hot enough. I find it somewhat disappointing and unfortunate that we encounter machines brewing at around 88 or 87 degrees, because when you have any light roasted coffee beans, you simply have no chance. That cannot be tasty. Ultimately, in a YouTube video where Philip and I tested numerous temperatures together, you can notice the temperature isn't really the absolutely most important thing. But brewing at 88 degrees, it's simply no fun at all.
So once again, directly out of the box. Which machines performed really well with brewing espresso without needing much excessive tweaking and adjusting?
Our understanding of the ideal brewing temperature and where we strive to achieve it is commendable for nearly all machines tested. However, exceptions were found, notably with those requiring tweaks, such as both Bezzera models, the BC10 and the Magica. This issue was also present in the ACM Homey, needing similar adjustments, and with the Profitec model. For the Profitec, it was straightforward, as the machine managed it easily, switching sometimes with PID control, leading to occasional variations, sometimes reaching excellent levels and other times less consistent. There we scrutinized the curve very closely and discussed extensively whether we should adjust it upwards or downwards, or what actions we need to take now. And we then all reached a consensus that, hey, during the second extraction, it was indeed within the ideal range where we really want the temperature to be. Clearly with a tremendous drop in temperature, but when we crank it up, it's even higher, yet it maintains the same temperature. At that point, what happened was this. It was indeed quite a tricky balancing act. Otherwise, you can be sure you'll need this heating up time. We've observed this situation with all the machines. It always takes these full 25 minutes.
It truly needs those minutes for each and every one. So, we've taken another look at it for all the machines that are present in this location. In less than 25 minutes, it's just not feasible from our perspective to attain the target temperature if you're truly aiming to achieve it. Regarding the BZ10, it indicates that it has reached a hot state after about 15 minutes. But in reality, it is not genuinely hot at that point yet. So you definitely need to give it a good rinse, opt for the second espresso, maybe even go for that third espresso.
You're right back to waiting for 25 minutes. You might as well just wait it out. That doesn't matter much at all at that point then either.
The same applies for our Xenia model, naturally. We've got this particular one equipped with a heating rod installed. So the target temperature would be somewhere around 89, which would be about 18 minutes. And it was still at 88, 89 degrees with us too. Not quite there yet. Again, after flushing and doing the first and second pull, it eventually reaches the desired point. But I think none of them truly stands out in a clear and significant way. It wouldn't be entirely accurate to suggest that one clearly scores higher here. We can say for certain that, relatively, the Mozzafiato is the slowest. So if you look now, no one stands out at the top, and the Mozart celebration hangs a bit down at the back. This is definitely the slowest method to have the big boiler up and running and operating smoothly here.
But at around 25 minutes, it was just the case that she could maintain consistency again over the duration of these 5 extractions. That was certainly sufficient, but it just takes some time. It really does take quite a bit of time. Apply this to all of your machines. I recommend consistently doing this for each device you operate. Who works at home with a boiler anywhere from 1.2 to 1.5 liters? That takes time. And amusingly enough, we can already transition into a discussion about energy efficiencies directly.
We indeed have the test winner.
We've got clear tests. Those are numbers. Simply put.
That's really surprising. Well, what's truly surprising? Actually, it's not. No, not surprising. Consider it not that surprising. Our method of measurement was as follows. After 25 minutes, we went ahead and made the 5 espresso shots. We checked how much electricity was used by then. First point. Then we checked after 2 hours. How much do we have? Then we pulled another espresso, checked how much we used then. And after 4 hours, the same thing again. So we effectively have almost 3 assignment periods. And during these periods, we looked at what the consumption was. If you assume you're turning on the espresso machine in the morning, you want to make an espresso for yourself, maybe also 2 espressos for your roommates. The Xenia uses the least electricity at 0.24 kilowatt hours.
Does not genuinely do much of anything, actually.
Then follow the Bezzera and then the ACM Homey.
Yeah, that honestly struck me too. When I first saw that number, it's a small boiler, really quite micro-sized, which truly could be why, but it's simply not insulated at all.
You can instantly recognize and notice that right away.
You'll notice it later, but at that point, she was still slightly ahead.
Let's run the machine for 2 hours. Maybe you're doing home office, probably working from home now. After a couple of hours, the next espressos are pulled. Still holding the top position on the leaderboard is the Xenia. At number 2, it's still the BZ10. And at number 3, slowly but surely moving forward, is the Lelit Mara X. Why is that?
Due to having an eco mode. Funnily enough, it still managed to heat up surprisingly quickly. The system worked smoothly. Though the boiler cools a little, it stays comfortably within range. It heats up again, and that was also a bit surprising for us. When you're making use of the eco mode, it really doesn't take all that much time for it to heat up again, since it doesn't completely cool down. The heating turns off when the boiler is insulated, so it keeps the heat in a little. Is he isolated just now? He is isolated just now, and there it really works too. I find it somewhat borderline when that happens every single day. Like after just half an hour, it already completely shuts off. And if you have 5 espressos at 5 times a day, it needs to heat up 5 times. That doesn't make too much sense.
Or like how you turn on the heating, because it's amazing how much temperature it obviously heats then, as it doesn't need much to get back to the temperature. After 4 hours, we are truly noticing a stronger difference for the very first time. Lelit takes first place, as it shuts off completely in between. What about the others? Increasingly, machines come with an eco mode now. There are now models from those we have that already come with an eco mode, which we haven't actually incorporated into our models yet.
Exactly, it's that legally you're required to have an eco mode today, especially with brew groups, with VMA brew groups, so that has to be installed. But nowadays, I think with almost all of them, or with the ones I know, you can turn it off on all of them too. Either through a keyboard shortcut or by pressing a button at the bottom of the machine. You press it once and then the eco mode is off. He wasn't there yet at that time. He still hasn't come inside yet, and that's why it doesn't completely shut down. Afterwards, you can switch it off again, and you will definitely notice that you're just ending up having a lower power consumption overall. You ramp it up again, and that's when you truly notice the difference. However, just be cognizant of it.
You'll have to wait another 15, 10, 15, or depending 20 minutes until it's hot again, especially if the boiler is not yet insulated in the third range, third setting. So really, at the front, the Lelit Xenia is still on 2, and third is the BZ10. You can clearly notice now the machines with the VMAI 61 thermosiphon brew group or principle consuming significantly more power, and those with heated brew groups or brew heads at this point. Like just now, the Xenia or even the BC10 consume noticeably less power, and that's quite a crucial aspect, hence it's important for us to specifically point that out. Let's take a closer look at the machines that are underperforming. That truly is a recurring pattern throughout.
This is the Rocket Appartamento, showcasing great and stable temperature while brewing, but it does relatively require more energy, as we're talking about. 0.34 kilowatt hours. At the first measurement point, that's somewhere around a third or 30% more. No half more, 50%, because 0.2, so 50% more power than the current table leader Xenia or BC10 in the first round. And the Magica, that's basically just with the boiler and without any kind of insulation. So it certainly needs electricity.
And that truly extends throughout, meaning we don't have to detail everything individually, but after 4 hours with the Magica, it ends up consuming over a full kilowatt hour. And in contrast, the Lelit Mara is merely sitting at around about 0.6 something.
And then definitely the ECM Mechanika, which is on the same level as the Appartamento and the Magica. And finally, in the latest ranking, the Cronometro really pushes in, with things like the chronometers, particularly the Mozzafiato, which then also requires quite a lot of electricity and actually consumes as much power as an entire apartment, which was very surprising for us because we didn't expect that there would be such drastic differences. it becomes evident that the insulated boiler absolutely makes a lot of sense, as an apartment with no insulated boiler needs power, 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 constantly requiring heating. Whereas the Cronometer and Mozzafiato come with insulated boilers, allowing them to ultimately slide in quietly at the end, and then you notice it with the Magica as well. And you'll see this with the EC as it begins the ranking process or something similar, so after you've probably now given it some thought. I don't know yet how long the video will end up being, but probably somewhere around an hour or an hour and a half that Benjamin and I got hooked up, got pulled in after we somehow told you everything about the machines. You probably want to know what decision has been made. Maybe some have already pre-played. Maybe we'll just watch the ending. Okay, then we can make it as funny as possible. Then you might watch the rest. Then you can simply say that there is no clear ranking, definitely. And that's why we also decided that we create personal rankings, because we, for example, have personal requirements. I want to steam at home and need significant power. I want it enjoyable and exciting for me when I steam, which is why I demand a lot of power from the steam plant. Benjamin is more focused on the sensory aspects, so my extractions really have to be absolutely perfect as well. You wouldn't be steaming at home, or you don't steam at home.
Yes, and if I were to begin steaming, then I would absolutely love to do it quite a lot. In that situation, I would definitely want a substantial amount afterwards, because that's when I have guests. I wouldn't make a cappuccino just for myself, so I have different criteria. And that's basically our conclusion. I think you need to take a look at what you want, what is important to you. And I believe we've now somewhat clearly worked out the strengths and weaknesses of the machine. And you have to take from there what suits you. And in the end, you need to practice with the machine to get the best out of it. And it works more or less with most. Some, I think it's clear we don't need to emphasize it again. They have many weaknesses. They might not be the logical machine and the logical choice. Others have many strengths and some weaknesses, and it really depends on what fits for you now. Which machine, let's say regardless of price, that's also a criterion. Which machine would you get for your home if price wasn't an issue?
If I ever received one as a gift, I would undoubtedly go for the Mozzafiato Cronometro R without any hesitations whatsoever. Firstly, this is personal now, but I find you beautiful. I really do find you beautiful. Still, there's a catch. I would need to test with a second, third, or even a fourth model to determine if the temperature rises. That would definitely be my big but. If price were of no concern whatsoever, I'd definitely opt for the Mozzafiato hands down.
I'd say, okay, we did agree the price doesn't really matter. We'll eventually get to discuss the dual boilers. The question is whether you would, after all, take the dual boiler?
I would probably choose a dual boiler machine then.
You still have the opportunity to elaborate. Mention one or two machines that particularly stand out to you and discuss why they might also be considered in your ranking.
I'm in what feels like a middle ground. I want the ability to steam, but at the same time, I also desire a decent brewing temperature, clean craftsmanship, and a machine without 1,000 sharp edges. And then I'm like, actually with the classic heat exchange espresso machines without temperature control, and going straight across the board. So, whether it's the Appartamento with the cutoff feature just expressing, I have to shift this railing around. Replace it with one made of stainless steel, because that's really a no-go for me. Then, the Magica also performs well. It's relatively expensive, not quite as well crafted. Then the Rubino performs well, but somewhere around the fourth extraction, it starts to struggle. Is a bit more nicely finished for it. And of course, I always find myself standing in front of it. I'll move a bit to the other side, the ECM. Also, the performs well, good temperature, but it goes down a bit, drops a bit more than 2 degrees after the 5th extraction or during these 5 extractions, and doesn't personally bring me much joy when steaming because it just gradually loses its edge.
But you are still a bit involved in the money sector is completely irrelevant, because you still picked machines that all cost around 14, 15, 16, depending on whether it's euros or francs invested. Price performance winners are none of them, in my view. Price performance completely goes, in my view, to the Lelit. Almost the one that delivers for this little money, and is still well made and still brings decent frothing capability, just frothing capability so suitable for beginners. That you really have time because it heats up so slowly, Yes, the temperature performance is not good because it doesn't even get worse. But as I said, even there, I believe, with the machine, as I already mentioned, it's worth making another video to really play around with it, to figure out how to get the most out of the machine. That's actually the crucial point. You need to really work your way into all these machines and find a method to successfully navigate through them. And then you also find solutions. And value for money, you have to say they do a really good job. And the Homey from ACM genuinely does that as well.
When it's tightened with the press or start, you can also have a professional do it, or where you buy it. Conduct comprehensive tests with the people involved, and then it will be set at the specified price.
1,000 euros, that's the cost. And truly the consistency was good. You just have to say, if you want to get a taste in this area, maybe even with a branch trimmer, with an affordable branch pruner, and say, I'll take the first step, keep it for 3, 4, 5 years, then sell it on, they don't lose much value. Then possibly I'll look into getting a dual boiler afterwards if I decide to go further into this hobby. Wants to move, super interesting choice.
Or also the Magica. With good temperature consistency, which stood among the top in the second extraction, making it great for streaming with a huge, massive water tank that unfortunately isn't as well processed everywhere. But hey, for the money you pay, it's reasonable, though it is somewhat priced a bit higher than in the past. So, it's definitely okay. So I really set a focus on steaming, and for that reason, my ranking currently puts the classic two-cycle machines at the forefront. The chronometers, of course, being the most expensive, clearly have to be mentioned, and one must really say they must deliver in terms of performance, also in terms of processing, they have to deliver too, definitely. On the ranking, also the Xenia surely belongs in there as well.
Not for the milk foam performance, but truly for its remarkable consistency. If espresso is truly important to you, then it's a fantastic machine. Highly consistent and very energy efficient. And you can indeed steam with it as well. That's true. You just need to have some patience and wait. When compared to the other two options, its steaming performance is noticeably and significantly lower. And if you say you're applying the same set of criteria, then unfortunately she just has a significantly worse chance. However, when considering aspects like consistency and similar factors, which are an absolute advantage for me personally, I must state that no other manufacturer is as close to their customers. We clashed, posed many questions, and although our first test wasn't great, there was an abundance of feedback and a strong desire to improve and develop it further. I would say that none of the machines out there truly stand a good chance to keep up if someone is fully committed to developing a machine further, and it's truly impressive when that's anticipated, and I genuinely appreciate that aspect of it a lot.
Xenia. An incredibly large number of features that are unique. You could debate it now. When you right-click, it's a timer that then stops. It would be super cool if a volumetric feature based on volume was included. Then it would be yet another point where we have to say, hey, this is awesome. It delivers consistently in terms of temperature and also comes with many, many small features. Water tank on the side, nicely constructed, no large sharp edges or anything.
Yeah, and a real eye-catcher. With the modularity, what I can choose, how I can assemble my machine, also with the things that are important to me or to you. The water tank story is, for many, I believe, in some situations, you can't just fill it from the top. And imagine all these machines, envision them in some hatch, they absolutely wouldn't work properly. You need a hose to get back there. Yes.
The machine's not for the kitchen, we need to...
Yeah, that's a philosophical question. Imagine you have the coffee machine on your RV. It's cramped somewhere. You just can't get in with a one sack. And here you could simply, you just have an option for filling. And that would already be a deal breaker for all 11 machines.
Important to note, as a criterion or a selling point is the claim that it heats up faster, which is most definitely not true.
This time also 25 minutes. Naturally, you could potentially use the second heating element. Maybe it would be faster then. We can't answer that. We don't have the capacity to. You can easily check it with us. Compare again. Because with us, after 18 full minutes, we still hadn't reached the target temperature, simply put.
And just at the target temperature, we've been even hotter because we weren't at the target temperature. What we definitely want to add or say in conclusion is that we've now tested a machine from the professionals, or rather the second one. We previously had one, but it was eventually replaced. It simply didn't perform in the same context and way that we've come to know and understand now. In this incredible perfection, which is actually a home machine in the use area where you really use it, namely the first 2 or 3 extractions, super. She simply just can't keep up with that. We're extremely excited for the upcoming tests because there will certainly be another professional takeaway included. And they will definitely perform.
Let's hope. We are definitely open to surprises. That was our second circle of attestation. For all those who were waiting for a simple answer, this machine is the best. Does not exist from our perspective. It's very individual. It depends entirely on what you are really looking for. Sorry that we can't make the decision for you. Simply because they all have strengths and weaknesses. We've done our best to present the strengths and weaknesses to highlight. We will also demonstrate that again in our article, which gives you an overview of all the relevant materials. Then you can really compare all the different things for yourselves and see what's truly most important. I believe we've demonstrated the important role that maintaining a constant temperature plays and so on and so forth. And in that regard, I would say that completes the dual circuit test. I'm definitely not planning to look at any dual circuits for a whole year now. I'm really excited about the
thermoblocks? Yeah, maybe there's one. What's really exciting is that machines might be released now that have been revamped and improved after the information in our videos. It becomes exciting once more. Portafilters should definitely go on the opposite side, while drip trays are correctly placed at the front.
From our perspective.
Ours, yes. That would make sense.
Well, I hope at least that a few more machines either deliver a decent speed or none at all. But yeah, let's have a look at what's happening. And there are also some new developments, and we will certainly incorporate them sooner or later. But now this also provides us with a solid foundation. I truly enjoyed it a lot. Working together with you on creating this overview was lots of fun. Thank you all for always being there, asking questions, and also helping select which machines we should test and how. And so now we're moving onwards to the next row. Just as a quick piece of information, since we continually receive so many questions from everyone all the time. Have you tested that yet, or have you tested that already? It's really like this. Everything we have tested, we have already published. That means you'll also discover it, and everything you don't happen to find, we haven't tested yet. And we will definitely get to testing that too, but I can't promise when, as we don't want to make commitments we can't keep. We've stretched ourselves thin too many times already, so thanks for understanding. And at least you now have something before Christmas, which is quite wonderful. Getting it ready before the holiday season, a sup.
Insight into what the machines can deliver, letting you choose the machine that perfectly fits your needs. Also, from my side, a sincere thank you for all the valuable input and feedback you've shared, and all the question and answer sessions we have the privilege to engage in with you. We learn an incredible amount from these interactions and are genuinely excited about the upcoming series. Take it out from the thermoblock.
This is the thermoblock, and that's really how it continues from this point forward. Have an amazing time, enjoy a truly fantastic end of the year, and we will definitely hear and see each other once again, soon, from the coffee makers.